Welcome to the Ignited Recovery Podcast, a new way forward for anyone looking for answers but feeling left out. If you've been searching for empowerment, triumph, and purpose, you've found them right here. You won't hear the same solutions, and you're not going to have any excuses to fall back on, because Ignited Recovery allows heroes to rise and become their best selves. I'm Dr. Adi Jaffe, and I can't wait to be your guide on this journey. Are you ready to become an ignited hero? All right, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the Ignited Recovery Secrets podcast. My name is Adi Jaffe, and I'm so happy to be here with you today to talk about habits. We all have them, whether we realize we do or don't. And the thing is that we've all learned them over the entirety of our life, right? So some of the things we learn really early. Things like how to tie our shoes, how to solve multiplication problems, how to talk about our feelings, how to fight with someone, how to be in a relationship, how to deal with our emotions and our anxieties. The only problem is that, first of all, we're probably not very sure how exactly we learned these things, right? For a lot of the people that I work with, they don't remember when these things first came to be for them, when these habits first formed. And then we're definitely not sure if we really learn how to do them the best way for us, right? Like, it's pretty easy to measure whether you're good at something or not based on, did you tie your shoes, right? Or do your shoelaces stay in place? Yes. All right, good work on that, right? Can you solve the multiplication problem? If you solve a problem in your own head and then you look at the number, do the numbers match? But when it comes to talking about feelings, fighting, dealing with anxieties, how many of us just do whatever is presented? We see if it works to reduce our anxiety. We see if it kind of functions in our relationship. And then we just go on with it, assuming it's a good enough solution, right? Like, I had a client of mine. He was an athlete, a really capable, strong, successful athlete. And he learned how to tie his shoes on multiplication table well. Not tie his multiplication table, but, how to solve it. And the thing is, when it got to the work we were doing together, when it came to talking about feelings, what he had learned in the past were that feelings were things that you had to repress, even pain, anxiety, depression, right? All those feelings were things you had to repress because there was a goal to reach, and that goal was victory. And let's say when it came to how to fight with other people, he was actually really good at that. He won almost every time that he got in a fight with somebody. I mean, sure, a few times he got in trouble because he ended up winning by beating the other person up. But a lot of times he was just able to intimidate the other person. And regardless, he always won. It's just that when he got into relationships, that way of fighting didn't necessarily serve him that well. See, the thing is, we all know that you can unlearn how to tie your shoes or learn new knowledge about math and things like that. But for some reason, when it comes to unlearning or relearning how to think and behave, feel, communicate, how many of us just believe that this is how I am? How many of you have said that before, right? This is just how I am. I can't change this. Well, I'm going to call bullshit on that. It's not true. It's not true at all. It's never been true. But just because we haven't been directly taught before, or maybe been taught directly by a teacher who knew how to create well-rounded goals for us, or maybe the people that taught us in the past, maybe the goals that they were trying to get us to achieve are not the goals we have now, right? Like that athlete. The goals of winning basketball and football games in high school and then in college and hopefully in the pros are not the same goals necessarily as you have in your relationships. But if the only tools you learn are in one of those contexts or, 13 years ago, and you keep applying the same principle, the same tools, they're not necessarily going to work for you. How many of you have had old habits that aren't serving you anymore? We all have them. So the thing that I want to tell you is all of these old habits can be unlearned. The question is, what does it take to actually change them, right? So let me just be clear. This is not as simple as just deciding that we want to erase the old memory of the way of doing things and then do it again. I mean, you could try this even with tying your shoelaces. A little experiment I have a lot of my clients do is just go, next time you have to put on shoes that have shoelaces, try to tie them the other way. Like if you spin the shoelace around the rabbit ear the right way, do it the left way. If you hold it with your right hand, hold it with your left hand. Just switch everything around. We can't really simply erase those old memories and the way we do things. Now, we used to believe in neuroscience, and people that taught learning used to believe that you had to actually unlearn, you had to erase the old memories in order to create new ones. Now we know that's actually not possible. That in all likelihood, those old memories always stay there. They just get overwritten by old ones. Now, I'm going to give you a little nerd alert here because I'm going to get into the weeds here a little bit in terms of types of memory and all that kind of stuff. So just stay with me for a moment because there are different types of memory. There's working memory. Working memory is that thing, if anybody remembers trying to memorize somebody's phone number or email address or maybe Instagram handle at this point, right? You do that thing where you just say it over and over in your head like, at Dr. D. Jaffe, at Dr. D. Jaffe, at Dr. D. Jaffe. Or back in the day, it would be like, 310-488-3978 or something like that. And you just keep repeating it over and over and over. That's working memory. It really only works up to about 30 seconds, sometimes maybe a little bit longer than that after you stop literally repeating it. That's why if you ever had one of those things where you try to remember a phone number and then you get distracted for a split second, you go back and the number is just gone from your brain. Once things leave working memory and they became encoded, like they were paid enough attention to and remembered, they go into long-term memory. But within long-term memory, we have different types of memory. We have something called episodic memory. That's like me remembering a vacation with my parents when I was a kid. That's an episode in my life. I remember it. There's semantic memory, knowledge-based memory. Like I know the meaning of a word. That's semantic memory. And then there's procedural memory. Tying your shoes, riding a bike, that kind of stuff, multiplication table, things like that. Now, you can probably already imagine like episodic memory and semantic memory are the things that you know to verbalize. They're explicit. They're things that you can say out loud to other people. Procedural memory are things you know how to do. You don't always remember exactly what the procedure is necessarily, right? Like if you sit down right now, you could probably break down how to tie your shoes or ride a bicycle, but you haven't said that out loud for a while. Now, here's what's important. Memories are like pictures of your entire brain network activation. Like imagine when an episodic memory, for instance, if everybody can go back to a memory with your family. If you remember a dinner or a vacation or a specific action you took with your family, the memory of that is literally like a frozen snapshot of everything that was happening and that you were attending to in your brain at the time that it was created. So whatever the visual cortex part of your brain was seeing, whatever the auditory cortex was hearing, and wherever position your body was in, and the smells, all that stuff, the feelings, the prefrontal cortex activation, all the parts of your brain that were active in that moment, their action, that whole network gets remembered almost literally like a little snapshot. Now, the type of memory we're talking about here, how do I change my habits around how to fight with other people? How do I change my habits around how to have intimate conversations or deal with my feelings? Those things, or deal with my anxiety, right? Those things fall probably under procedural memory because you probably do a lot of these things. Like when you fight with somebody else, you're not exactly explicitly thinking through every step of the fight, just like tying your shoes. You do the thing you've learned how to do. But again, if you think about it, even those types of memories were created in an explicit way, right? Like you learned, somebody told you or showed you or both how to tie your shoes and ride a bike. And then somebody told you what to do with your feelings. Like odds are somebody in your life told you, hey, we don't talk about that kind of stuff outside. If you're telling me that you're feeling depressed, you figure, walk it off, or go read a book, or watch something, or go outside and play. Don't talk to me about these things. That was an explicit way of learning about it, right? Somebody told you what to do with this stuff. It's just that through repetition and seeing it over and over and over and learning it, it became automatic. And what we know from learning in neuroscience is that the way to change these things is practice. There are really two things that help memories get cemented, and that is intensity and practice. And you know this because some of the most intense things in your life that you remember only had to happen once, and you remember them well. Like if you got in a fight and you don't get in many fights, you'll remember that really, really well. If you had to do something repeatedly, like if you were on a team and you had to practice many, many times, you'll remember a lot of those events. Why? Because the repetition was there. So that's how we're going to get to change the habits that you no longer want to have. The way we're going to do this is by practice. So first, you have to identify what it is you even want to change. What do you want to do? How do you like this to be better? What is not working for you? So for instance, many clients I work with will say things like, well, I've been smoking weed for 14 years. When I stop, I get uncomfortable. Well, we have to understand, why is it you want to stop and what is getting uncomfortable? Then you got to find a teacher, a coach, a book, something that describes a method for achieving that change. That's what the abstinence myth, for instance, is great for, right? Identify what is it that you even want to change, and then read tools to be able to create that change for yourself. Because if we don't really understand what it is you want to change and what the goals that you're trying to reach, you might not know what techniques are even appropriate. Because, that client of mine, for instance, it was totally reasonable for him to suppress his feelings around football games to achieve a goal of victory. It's just that nobody ever told him that's not necessarily the right technique when you're in a relationship. Now, just to be clear, changing your habits starts out being really uncomfortable and difficult. If you actually did that experiment of trying to tie your shoes the opposite way, and if you didn't try it right now, you'll notice it. It's weird and uncomfortable. Just like riding a bike and tying your shoes was at first. I had to teach my kids how to tie their shoelaces. And I got to tell you, the first few times, not only were they not getting it because they were learning it from scratch, but they were also really, really uncomfortable around it, right? They would mess it up and they would get anxious. They would get resistant around riding a bike. My kids for a while, especially when we took the training wheels off, they kind of wanted to quit because it hurt. Literally sometimes, right? They fell and hurt themselves. It hurt. That's why everybody quits before the actual change happens. Because what happens around changing habits in our heads is we start believing crap like, I'll never get this, or this is just who I am, I can't do that other thing, or I'm too stubborn or weak or old or used to the way things are. Now, let me remind you that for some of you, those exact same phrases were talked about and were spoken out loud and were said when you were trying to learn how to ride a bike. I can't get this. I'm too weak for this. But then it gets easy and now you can just do it without looking. Now, let me give you a specific example that has worked really, really well with some of the people that I've worked with. This is just an example around relationships, but for that client of mine, that athlete who was constantly arguing with his wife, and while he was winning the fight, right, if you counted by how many times he felt like he won the fight, he was probably coming out on top. But the problem was that he was losing his relationship and his family. Like he was on the verge of divorce. And it took a lot of coaching. It took a lot of coaching to even get him to understand that there's another way to think about it. We're going to do a future episode on perspective, but it took a lot of time to even have him allow the notion that the way he was looking at it was a little bit wrong. And I want to share with you one of the phrases that eventually got him to listen and really think about the way he was behaving. And it went like this. We were talking about another fight that he and his wife had. They were sitting there and they were describing what had happened. And a lot of times clients in situations like this talk about the details. She said this and it was this time. It was 2:30. No, it wasn't 2:30. It was 2:45, etc. They were talking about one of those fights. I don't know if you've ever had one of those conversations, but if you have, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And he was sticking to his guns about having been right. And then I said, okay, hold on. Let's assume that it's true, that you're right, that the details you're giving us are right, and it's not a matter of perspective if you were late or not. So you're right. Now, I understand how being right about that time will serve you in class or will serve you on the field when you're playing. But when it comes to your relationship and your family, is the goal to be right? Or do you want to be happy? And that single question really made him think for the first time about, was he even going for the right goal in his relationship? He was great at achieving goals. But what if he was aiming for the wrong one in this instance? Once he resolved that question in his brain, he could actually start out trying to figure out how to resolve the conflict with his wife differently. Now, just so it's clear, that took a lot of practice. But not only is he constantly improving to this day, but divorce isn't even on the table anymore. Now, some of you might say, well, but what if he is right? What is he just supposed to accept the quote unquote wrong conclusion in each one of these situations? And like I said, we're going to do a whole episode on perspective. But let me change that question on you a little bit. What is being right and being wrong in a relationship, right? You've heard, if any of you tuned into the Wednesday episode with Sophie and I, you've heard there's been a lot of conflict in our relationship. Is the goal for me in our relationship to improve the quality of the relationship, or to prove that I was there at a certain time, or that Sophie said something 3 weeks ago when she believed she said something else? Because at the core, even for this client with his wife, what mattered was how their communication affected the way they each saw the relationship. And if you're trying to win in your relationship, you're trying to make somebody else lose. And I would argue that for a lot of you listening right now, you can really quickly understand that's a bad habit. To try to make your partner lose is probably not a good start, not a good base to build a relationship on, right? So my question for you today is, what sort of goals can you reconsider in your life? And what habits are you going to be able to change so that you can live a happier life? Like, if the goal up to now has been to quiet your anxieties, because you've had a lot of them throughout your life, and you just want to turn the volume down, that could be one goal, right? Turning down my anxieties. And those are the kind of goals that work well when what you're looking for is, when you do things like you drink to calm down your stress, or you smoke some weed to calm down your stress. Those are things that might work to resolve, to turn down the volume of your anxieties. But what if you started deciding that the goal is actually to become less anxious? That the goal is actually to look at what it is in your life that is making you anxious and understand how to turn the volume down on those things, because then you don't have to cover up your anxiety as much. If you're struggling with communication in your relationships, and it doesn't matter what relationships, right? Family, romantic, friendship relationships, I really urge you to check out the relationship intro course that Sophie and I did. The thing is that nobody really taught you how to talk to a partner. Nobody ever taught you how to discuss uncomfortable issues, feelings, resentments in a relationship, or how to overcome trauma in a relationship. That's why most people leave. And that's why we created that course, is to improve communication and intimacy in relationships. Quick course that you can do in a weekend with your partner, or even do by yourself preparing. If you have family members you don't really know how to talk about, or talk to about uncomfortable things, or a partner, etc. What's important is to understand your goals and what you're trying to get done. Now, if some of you listening right now have habits, serious habits that are standing in your way of being happy, you may want to change them. If you overeat to deal with depression or anxiety, if you overwork to deal with feelings of inferiority or intimacy problems, right? A lot of my clients become workaholics. Why? Because they don't know how to resolve the conflict at home, so they'd rather just stay at work. And it looks like a win, right? Because they're kicking ass at work. They're getting promoted, they're making more money, but the rest of their life is falling apart. Or for you, if it's not overeating or overworking, if it's drinking or smoking weed or running to porn, each one of these things by themselves can become roadblocks to happiness. And I have a free workshop that I will post a link to here that starts having you look at these things from a different angle. Because I got to tell you guys, we all have habits that we acquired over our lifetime. And unfortunately, we've been told, or we've just thought without talking to anybody about it, that we're stuck with these habits. But in the same exact way that you learned how to drive a car at the age of 16, even though you never knew how to do it before, and you've learned new things every single day of your life, you can learn how to change these habits. All it takes is the right tools, the right guidance, and a little bit of time and practice. So with that, I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. Take a screenshot of this. Leave us your little takeaway, the one thing that you took away the most from this. Tag me at Dr. Adi Jaffe and tag Ignited at ignited.me. And let us know, because the goal of this podcast is to make your life better and happier. Thank you so much. I'll see you next week. Bye. Thank you for tuning in to the Ignited Heroes Recovery Podcast. I really hope you found the information here useful and that we'll see you back here next week. And look, I want to make sure that this podcast is the most useful it can be for you, so please let me know by emailing info@ignited.com if there are any specific topics or questions you'd like to have addressed. As usual, if you like this episode, I would love for you to leave us a 5-star review and rating. Thanks, and see you next week.